Afternoon. I am Anna Kelma, and I'm with AFT Academics. I use she, her, hers pronouns, and we are so excited for you all to tune in with us for another virtual discussion with members of this movement. For those of you who aren't familiar with AFT Academics, we are a movement in higher education across campuses, across job titles, and across the US. We want to transform the higher ed system so that it is led by the people who are the backbone of our colleges and universities. And it starts with conversations like this. So today, we're going to hear about another form of labor, often invisible labor, which is parenting. I also want to acknowledge that not everyone who does this work is defined legally as a parent, so we acknowledge you also. Everyone on this panel, I believe, goes by that term, but you are not forgotten and you are important as a caregiver as well. We're going to talk about what the challenges are, what can be done to support parents or people in this role, and what it's going to take to change the current standards. So I'll be facilitating, and I think first, let's let the panelists introduce themselves. Let's start with Denise. Denise, could you please share your pronouns, what you do, where you work, and the number and ages of the people you take care of?
Thank you, Anna, and so good to be on this panel with everyone. My name is Denise Frazier, as you can see, and my pronouns are she, her, hers, and I work as a staff member in the Gulf South region, and I only have one child, and they are 21 months. Well, they will be 21 months this Saturday. So that's me.
Awesome, and that's such a fantastic milestone. So let's move on to Leanne.
Yeah, congratulations to Denise for getting this far. I'm Leanne Finnegan. I use she, her pronouns. I live in Philadelphia. I'm a metadata librarian, and I'm also the vice president for operations for Temple Association of University Professionals, and have therefore outed where I work. And I have a 4-year-old child who is fantastic and at preschool right now.
Awesome. We're happy you're here, Leanne. Polly, would you please introduce yourself?
Sure. My name's Polly Alice McCann. I'm an author and a poetry editor. I am an adjunct professor in Kansas City, Missouri. I have 2 kids. One is a 7th grader. One is a sophomore in high school. And I also take care of my mom and sometimes one of my siblings.
Yes, yes. Thank you for being here. Shannon.
Hi, everyone. My name is Shannon. I go by he, him, his. I teach at a Great Plains Midwest State School, and I'm a faculty member in music, theater, and dance. I have 2 children, a 15-year-old and a 12-year-old.
Welcome. Tristan, welcome.
Hi. Hello. Hi, I'm Tristan Williams. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm in Central Appalachia. And my 2 kids are 6, just turned 6 last week, and my son will be 11 in August. And I'm a graduate student, so 5th year PhD candidate.
Welcome. Thank you all for introducing yourselves. It's great to have all of you here. It's the end of the year can be so busy. And so I just want to acknowledge the time you've taken out today to have this discussion with us, as well as away from your family and all your other obligations. And to those of you tuning in, we're happy you're here. This is going to be a great discussion. We've got a wide range of job titles here, different places across the country, as well as different ages. So I'm curious to hear the different responses and experiences that people have. I think there are a lot of assumptions made about what it's like to be a parent. I wonder if each of you could enlighten us to some of the things we might not know, starting with Denise. What do people not know about being a parent while working in your position?
Since I'm a relatively new parent, I find that I am consistently discovering what I don't know as I move forward in this position. And so one of the things that I didn't know was the wide variety of services that could be offered to faculty versus staff versus facility workers versus students, and how that really runs the gamut and how that relates to how those different positions might be valued at the university level. And that's something that I wasn't privy to before being a parent. So as a new parent, it seems very obvious to me how those hierarchies get articulated with the offerings and how those offerings relate to your position in the university. So that was a big awakening for me after being a parent, recognizing that, you know, just as a staff person here, there's certain needs that I have that a faculty member, for instance, would not have, and just understanding how different that is across the board with regards to each position. So that's one thing that I would state as an awakening and a new understanding for me as a parent.
Yeah, it's not unusual that the different job titles feel those different levels of hierarchy and importance. I find it interesting that by these offerings, that just adds to all of that, when the role that everyone does on campus is just as important, right? Like without one role doing one thing, who would fill the gap?
Absolutely.
So I'm curious to hear from others on this panel. Leanne, what would you say as a librarian? What's something that we might not know?
Yeah, so like, first of all, what I found is, working at a university, there are people in different positions. They have all sorts of types of schedules. I work a more traditional 9 to 5-ish job. I don't go with like the calendar, the academic calendar. I work year round. And one thing that I've had to articulate both to my colleagues who don't have that kind of schedule, but also even in my own organization, we do have sick time, paid time off, etc. But I essentially have to share that with my child. So I use it for my own illnesses. I use it for her illnesses. I was for a time a single parent as well, which is sort of compounded that the need for extra time off. And it was tricky getting people to kind of like continue to extend compassion and understanding as I'm sure Denise with a younger child too, when they go to daycare, they're just always sick. And then the other thing is, as we transition to working, remotely, I think that there is assumption sometimes that, if you're working from home and your child is home with you, that you can also work at the same time. That might be true if your child is older and more independent. That is absolutely not true for many of us who were home trying to work and take care of our kids at the same time. It was a real juggling act, for sure.
Absolutely. Especially when you have that 9 to 5, right? When your kids are used to, when mommy's home, like it's mommy time, right? And so it can be confusing. Absolutely, and difficult to juggle. Holly, what is it like for you as an adjunct faculty person? What do we not know?
Well, this is a different vein of thought, but being a parent and working at a community college, I was able to look at like the curriculum from my students' school and then the curriculum at the college, and I try to advocate for my students differently. So I tried to advocate things like, my kids are in elementary school and they're learning how to make podcasts and websites and videos and slideshows, and these students don't have to do that. Don't you think we should make that a requirement and maybe have them do some presentations and practice talking out loud and just try to say, my students learned this in fourth grade. Why is this on the requirements for, why do none of these college students know that stuff that my kids are learning in fourth grade? So just to have being a parent really helped me analyze the curriculum.
Yeah, giving you a different perspective on your role. Yeah. Shannon, what do you think? What do we not know?
I'll speak to this both from as a former graduate student and as a faculty member. As a former graduate student, you'll often find people who don't understand the dynamics and the demands and responsibilities of being a parent or a caregiver, and trying to explain that to someone who does not have those requirements, specifically maybe an advisor or a professor or someone structurally, that perhaps has some sort of power, can be quite a challenge. And as a faculty member, I kind of go back to what Denise said, that there's these inequities that go across the board, depending on where you are within the university or the community college, but also just across the nation when it comes to different schools and different programs. I mean, I'm proudly can say I went to UW-Madison, and we have a fantastic office for families and care providers that offer grants and stipends. We had neighborhood schools. I mean, all kinds of things like that. But at my current school, most staff members and faculty members can't even find childcare, much less affordable childcare in town.
Yeah, childcare, it can be really expensive, and the discrepancies across the country, that's one of the reasons why we're here. Tristan, what do we not know about what it's like to be a graduate student worker and a parent?
I think for me, my biggest experience is being one of the few parents in the program. So it's a very solitary experience. There aren't a lot. I mean, I think, especially, I should say, graduate students with young children. There are a few in the program who have older, more independent children, but having young kids, there's I think, a disconnect on how much time that takes to take care of small children. I can gauge my entire graduate school experience on the age of my daughter, because I started my master's when she was a newborn. And so that, I think, is a big discrepancy. We have some funding opportunities offered for childcare, but the way my husband and I have kind of divvied up our time is that we try to split it to where we don't have to pay for childcare, which then also really limits the kind of opportunities that I can take advantage of in terms of research and internships and all of that. So you have to get creative when you're trying to build up that CV, I guess, would be one way of looking at it.
Yeah. I'm hearing a lot of themes around childcare, around resources that you may or may not have, how they're different depending on where you go, what your job title is. There's just so much that's just not uniform, and so much given that I think people just don't realize. And Leanne, speaking about this pandemic and just what it's like to work from home as well, I'm hoping we can learn a little bit more from everyone about what that's been like. I wonder, though, as you all have described some of these things that you've dealt with that those of us without children might not understand yet, could you perhaps paint a picture of one or some of the things that you've described? Is there a specific experience you're willing to share with us that captures what some of these things are like for you? Polly, do you think you could start by sharing with us?
Yeah. I think I like to talk about the amount of hours that parents work who are in higher ed, and compared to how much their salary is, oftentimes is becomes mathematically frightening. What I could do instead of math is just take you through my day. So in the morning, when I had 3 classes in the fall semester, I'd get up. I would homeschool my son because COVID made it so that we had to protect my mother who lives with us. So both kids decided to stay home for the year to protect her. And so then the type of school they offered us wasn't appropriate for my son. It was too easy. He built an algorithm to push the button by itself and left the room. So I was homeschooling him. Then I would run in here and start teaching English 80, which people that often have English as a second language, trying to teach them what a verb is and what an adjective is. So that was very strenuous and a really long class. Then I'd prep for that. I'd finish that. I'd record it. I'd edit the video. I'd type up the notes. I'd post the notes. I'd fix the classroom. I'd remind everybody what the homework was. Then the next class would happen all over again. And then the next class, no breaks, no lunch. By the time I finished up my notes at the end of the day, it would be 6 o'clock. I would have worked 12 hours. And if there was a lunch break, I would run in to teach my son and then prep for the next day. So even though I taught 3 days a week, the other days I was doing my gig work to make income. When I calculated how much money I made, it would go down from the school estimated $45 an hour. But if I did any prep or grading papers, my income would go down to $10 an hour. And if I did anything extra like editing videos or answering emails, it went down to below $10 an hour for income.
Wow. I'm picturing one of those cartoons with like the multiple arms and all the things in the air. Yeah, and to do that every day. That's a very vivid picture. Denise, could you paint a picture for us?
Yeah, thank you. And thank you, Polly. So much of the work is just not during the regular time, especially for an adjunct. And I worked as an adjunct. So I definitely understand. As a staff person, there does feel like a limitation on the hours. So that feels really doable being a parent. But just wanted to share an observation. So as a parent being in a staff position, I've increasingly recognized that the idea of success is related to your ability to access support, whether that's with a partner, finances, family, or caregivers. So I'm trying to think of what diverse work models can be created to adapt to the varying degrees of familial responsibility, and how does parental responsibilities relate to your socioeconomic status or your marital status and your position in higher ed, because everyone, we all might be parents, and you might work with parents, but not all parents will understand what your specific situation is and how that relates to what your socioeconomic status is, whether you're working as an adjunct or as a staff member or as faculty. How does that relate to what support you have at home? Do you have a friend or a partner or whoever who's helping you raise your child? In my case, I'm a single parent, so I've had to get really creative about how I balance time and finances and what goes towards getting childcare for night events. So that's just like an observation that I have, that even though you might work with a lot of parents, and you all might be parents, that everyone's situation is so diverse that that needs to continuously be acknowledged, and how important it is to speak bluntly to what that need is.
Absolutely. Can we say that again? Can you say that one more time? Our vision of success is directly related to our access to resources. Did I get that right? Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. How true that is. That just hit me right here. I'm just still sitting with it. Shannon, Do you feel brave to follow that up?
Well, thank you, Denise, for that, because kind of what I wanted to say is the importance of those support structures. And part of the challenge is how to navigate that, especially as a grad student, or perhaps if you're faculty or staff, if you've picked up and moved to a new community where you have no friends, you have no acquaintances, you have maybe the people you work with. And I know for my grad school experience, it was quite a challenge. The first year we had a newborn and we lived off campus, very far off campus. And it was very difficult to meet anyone that had children in our neighborhood. And it was very difficult for anyone who I worked with, because no one had children, to understand really the process and kind of what we were going through. We eventually moved closer to campus to family and partner housing. And that made a huge difference, because immediately I met all kinds of other people in different disciplines who were kind of going through the same kind of challenges of making your way through a graduate program, or at a new job with perhaps a newborn, and all those kind of hurdles and all the kind of weirdness of being a parent, and the unexpected moments, and how to balance that with perhaps scholarship, your professional work, retaining perhaps your TA-ship or your line. And those support structures really, I think, were key, because I probably wouldn't have continued in academia, because it was so it was absolutely unsustainable, because if you don't have those support structures, it's incredibly challenging to kind of balance all these spinning plates.
Yeah, I'm going to say it again. Our vision of success is directly related to our access to resources, right? Yes. Wow. Absolutely. And it puts another observation around other systemic issues we have, just pandemic aside, parenting aside. Wow. Tristan, would you like to share? Can you paint a picture for us?
I mean, I think for me, going off of our vision of success is directly related to those resources. I got to a point in my graduate career where I realized that the difference between a top-notch grade, like an A, versus maybe an A minus or something like that, is the amount of time I spent with my family. Um, and I got to the point where I recognized that I was no longer going to sacrifice the time with my family in order to to get those top level marks, because I was beating myself up, and in the process feeling guilty as a parent and feeling guilty as a student, and I couldn't do it anymore. It was like Shannon was saying, it's just not sustainable to constantly be putting yourself in that position. And in general too, like with my master's program, I was the only one that had small children. So I didn't have really anybody to kind of commiserate with in my cohort. Like, yeah, this is what I'm going through. How are you dealing with it? You know, bouncing ideas off of each other, or maybe even having the opportunity to exchange times. Like, I'll take your kids for X amount of time. You take my kids for X amount of time. And that's kind of gotten better as I gotten into a bigger program for my PhD. But again, that idea that I wasn't willing to sacrifice my time in order to get the top, to be the best of the best, so to speak. Like, I don't feel like that should have been a requirement. So that's really kind of speaking to my personal experience thus far.
To kind of add to that, Tristan, I would say that there is a great deal of labor that it takes to build those structures, right? So if you're coming into a program that perhaps doesn't have those structures or networks, that you kind of have to build those from scratch. I'm at a school right now where I can already tell from talking to grad students and faculty with little ones that it's a challenge. challenge. It's a major challenge versus some other programs and schools that have more of those structures in place.
I also want to add to it's like not just the student aspect of it, but as part of my program, I have to teach as well. So I have the demand and rigor of being a student and the demand of being an instructor. This isn't just a TA where I'm grading for an instructor. I am the instructor on record for my courses. And so I'm building off my syllabus. I'm, doing all of the grading. I'm, doing all of my class prep and all of that, and doing that on top of being a parent, on top of being a student, and then on top of a pandemic. It just exhausting. It's really, really the only word I have for it.
Yeah, I think the pandemic has kind of revealed just how precarious a lot of our support structures are. I mean, my daughter was 3 when the pandemic hit, and I was a single mom at the time. I feel like I was just starting to get into a groove. I don't have family here. And, then with quarantine and everything, all of those, the sort of support networks and resources I kind of cobbled together for myself over the previous 3 years just were not accessible anymore.
Yeah. Yeah. That kind of leads into the next question that I have. You all have already started talking about it, but how did the pandemic, COVID-19, impact you as in your role? I'm already hearing that like even access to resources, and I think I also heard like folks who had new jobs, like not even having the ability to build a network at the beginning of it all. Like, please share with us your experiences. Shannon, I think you talked about this a little bit. Do you want to kick us off?
I know for myself, there was a great deal of anxiety regarding the university and what the university was doing and what it was not doing. There was not much transparency. We felt like our university was taking a lead March. Then in April, we started hearing less and less. By May, it seemed like things were being obfuscated and hidden, silenced over June, July, and August. Come September, it was a mixture. We are going back full force in fall, but we've yet to hear exactly what this looks like. Part of this has to be the dynamic of our state being conservative and our university essentially waiting, I believe, until they're out of session to move toward some policy regarding this. But my daughter's immunocompromised, so this was a very serious issue. And the idea that I was teaching from home and then my 2 kids, because of the danger of this, we were all staying at home doing all our work from a distance. And it was the challenge, because I'm helping teach a high schooler, helping teach a middle schooler, then I'm teaching my own students, and then I have about 95 advisees on top of the 4 classes. So you're called to do quite a bit. And there's that underlying anxiety of, when will this ever end? When will I be able to see myself back with students and so forth? So I finished grades today, and I hope that the book is closed on this semester, and I'm hoping not to think too much more about it, except to kind of reflect and learn.
Well, and congratulations getting your grades in. We're happy you're here with that time crunch for sure. All of you. It's a tough part of year for sure. Kind of brings me back to something that I was hearing before, is like the anxiety, and Tristan, when you were talking about choosing between like your grades being directly related to how much time you spend with your family, like why do we live in a system where you have to choose between the two? Like that's just not fair. But more on this topic about the pandemic, Polly, what was it like for you?
Well, Well, I described to you one of my days during the pandemic. And I think that Leanne and Tristan and all of you have great points about the exhaustion. So that just required more from us, more time. And my students were suffering. Normally, when I was on the urban campus, I'd have people with narcolepsy, people suffering from cancer, people getting homeless. And I'd also have people winning scholarships and people achieving dreams, or maybe both of those, right? So great things and terrible things would happen during the semester. And because I was an adjunct, I wouldn't be able to connect. I wasn't always invited to or knowing when these meetings were. There wasn't a support group for me. There was no one to tell the victories to and the troubles to. So when COVID hit, the same thing happened, only worse. I was in this office every day teaching my students. Some of them were suicidal, some of them had no food and or were very nervous. They had friends who had died. I had a girl call in from class while driving to a funeral. So these students are suffering a lot, but we had a great program where I can send a little note and says, this student needs care. Would the counselor please call them? It's a really great program, but there was no care for me. Like there was no one for me to talk to. I wasn't invited to any meetings the entire semester. So I just felt really alone. And then when I would zoom in, everyone's face was black, with a white letters. They couldn't always get their internet to work. The more needs they had socially, the more their internet wouldn't work. So it just created a lot of needs that I felt I was didn't have any support, as much support as I needed to help them. And there was no one to support me.
Yeah, it's something educators, people in the education system do over and over and over again, right? Like you're most times when I talk to folks, why do you do this work? It's because of the students, and to stretch yourself so far, even going back to that choice you have to make between like, whose kids do I take care of? These kids are my own or myself. Back to that choice. Leanne, I'm curious to hear from you. How has the pandemic affected you?
There's lawn work outside, so hopefully you can see me or hear me. I mean, it was like, where do you even begin? I don't know. Lots of daycares and schools. My daughter's preschool was closed until about July. Well, parents had to deal with schools being closed for longer than that too. I consider myself lucky, I guess. I do share custody with her father, but it's a 75-25. So I had her about 5.5 days per week. And I'm expected to work, again, like a traditional 9 to 5, so 35 plus hours a week on top of that with a 3-year-old. And it just, I also have ADD. And so it was like an absolute nightmare trying to focus on anything and feel like I could do anything well. I did enjoy like a credible amount of flexibility because I have a supervisor who's just an incredible person and colleague, but I was kind of the exception. I feel like I heard from people all over who were not extended that same flexibility. They would take care of their child during the day and then begin their work day as soon as their child went to bed at night. And they would work until basically their eyes couldn't even remain open anymore. And I heard this from a number of people. I think also just the stress. I mean, I in my introduction, I said I'm a union leader on campus, and we serve librarians, but also faculty, adjuncts as well, and academic advisors. And I heard from people, our members and staff within the library all the time, just the fear, the absolute fear, the sense of being completely overwhelmed all the time, nonstop. And then in the middle of all that, my cousin, who's less than a decade older than me, contracted COVID, likely at work. and passed away. So the fight, that we were trying to wage to keep campus closed after the fall semester was deeply personal for me. All I could think about was my cousin and the people who I talked to, colleagues I talked to, who were terrified. I constantly worried about my child, my partner, my family, my colleagues, the members of my AFT union. And, at the time, I think I never felt so powerless. As we're sort of cleaning up and I can reflect a little bit, I'm trying to take note of the power that each of us really does have. And I think that we were able to see during the pandemic. So I'm going through like a big period of reflection to sort of like, what could we take away from this that's positive? What can we take away from this that helps us sort of maintain that emotional connection and solidarity between each other? And that's kind of what's guided me, out of the pandemic. It's not post-pandemic, but it's certainly not as strict now.
Yeah, with the powerlessness and the fear and the what can we take away from it? As you were speaking, I just remembered how when we all shut down last spring, like we were in the middle of an academic year or an academic quarter or an academic semester. And again, when folks were like, when Polly was saying, what about me? Like, where was you all did a very quick turnaround to just make it work and make it happen. And I don't know what that took. I'm hearing it took a lot of anxiety and stress and all of that, but it's something that I think we don't always think about when we're considering how this system functions. And also too, like when you're speaking about your supervisor, it just led me back to what Denise said earlier, like even supervisors are a resource and how they manage us and how they think about what we do and how we do it. That's also adding to those resources. And I think I speak for everyone in the world when we say that good managers are hard to find often, unfortunately. I don't think that's their fault. I think that's the system we live in, but wow.
I'll also add on to what Leanne said is that, and I feel like this anxiety is really carrying over not only to the fall of kind of what's this look like, when we have 17 and 18-year-olds show up on campus who perhaps aren't vaccinated. What does this look like, if we have to unfortunately shut down again? I mean, and I know part of my anxiety was my worry for all my students who were contracting COVID. I mean, just, kind of constantly getting emails from student life concerning that. And I have some serious anxiety about how our students and their interpersonal skills, like, are they going to be able to kind of talk to everyone, like kind of authentically? What does that look like kind of getting back into that space? And then finally, I know for my university, as COVID was rolling down, they unveiled a revitalization effort where essentially they're going to be looking at all of our departments and programs to make them quote unquote stronger, which I handed it to someone to read who works in PR and they were like, yeah, they're probably looking to cut things. So I feel like there's a great deal of anxiety of where these universities are going to find the extra money that they, most public universities at least, that they lost through COVID.
Yeah. Fear of the unknown as well. I see Tristan, you want to add, I just wanted to make sure we didn't forget Denise. Denise, could we come back to you, Tristan? Is that okay? Awesome. Denise, I just want to make sure that we include you. How did the pandemic impact your role as a administrative director?
Thank you, Anna. I also just want to say I'm so sorry, Leanne, about the loss of your cousin. I've also lost family members during this time, and it's just made the whole pandemic experience a lot deeper and something that I'll never forget, even if we supposedly go back to normal or whatever that means. I just wanted to preface my comments by saying that. And I just want to briefly say that I was able to teach in the fall after the pandemic started in March for us here. And we taught asynchronous classes, and I was very concerned about the mental health of the students. So just putting that out there, we talked about that, but that was a major concern. And also, as you stated, Polly, seeing the black squares, there's nothing more dystopic than that, right? And so that was a very challenging time. Some of the beautiful moments and points of the time is that I had, before the pandemic started, I had already arranged for my son to have care in the house because he continuously got sick at daycare, and I was in the emergency room a couple of times. It got serious at points, and was happy that a friend of mine was able to step in and that I had the resources to pay my friend to take care of him. So I was ready for the pandemic before the pandemic started, and very grateful to be able to work at home and watch him take his first steps at 6, 7, 8 months while the pandemic was first getting underway. And also I'll briefly state, very important to have the work environment where I can talk openly with my boss about what my needs are, that, we frequently have night events that I'm supposed to attend, and to say, now because of this pandemic and because they're, the normal nannies and babysitters, all of that, that's not a thing anymore. Like, we're all trying to protect ourselves and our air, right? So I don't have childcare. So I will not be available for this event. And that's it. And I'm very grateful that, that was something that was understood. And even if it wasn't understood, it's just still not a thing. There's no way that I would have been able to parent an 8-month-old by myself and speak in an event, and there were moments where I ended up having to do that at times, and it wasn't great. And I had to just forgive myself and let everyone know that this is, even though this isn't professional for me to state this out loud because of respectability politics related to working in academia, this is what I'm personally dealing with as a result of this pandemic. And my needs are to have my camera off or to have you take over for this. And so it's allowed me to be more expressive about immediate needs and concerns, because I do want to try to show up for both, but the reality is that's not a thing, and the child is always first. So that's it.
Yeah. That's what you're speaking to about childcare workers and not going back. I read an article as well about the concern about everybody else going back to work, but that is a very transient profession and unstable profession as it is. I believe the article is speaking about the concern around, will the workforce return so that parents can go back to work as whatever normal was before? For sure. Thanks for sharing that, Denise. I want to circle back to Tristan. Tristan, I'm sorry to cut you off.
Oh, you're fine. No, I just wanted to add too that with my experience in the pandemic, my husband was he's a fast food restaurant manager. And so his day to day when the pandemic began didn't change at all. And so for me, that was really hard to have my kids at home while I was at home trying to work. But my husband was still pulling his 60-hour work weeks, 50, 60-hour work weeks, as if nothing had changed. So there was this intense anxiety every time for, like, I think the first 3 or 4 months, every time he walked through the door, is today the day that he comes home and, we end up contracting COVID? Is this, the situation, like, moving forward? And so that was incredibly stressful. And on top of that, when we transitioned, I don't feel like I've had a break since this pandemic began, because if it wasn't, transitioning from my in-person classes to online, then I was preparing the entire summer for what either was going to be me online teaching or in person. And then I ended up teaching in person. So then I had to change up the way I do my in-person classes entirely. So, I mean, I just feel like it's been back to back to back. And with the childcare issue, I haven't had a babysitter in a year and a half. I can't find a babysitter. I have been trying to find a babysitter. It's just not there. Like, I've used care.com. I've looked around locally and everything. There's just no one's biting. And I don't blame them. It's not their fault. But I mean, it's getting to the point, like, I'm at the very end of my rope with it all, and I don't, something's got to change. Who knows? But I mean, something's got to give.
Yeah, and that statement leads me into my next question. We're running low on time, and there are a couple questions left. So I wonder, we've already kind of alluded, like, things are looking like they're headed back to some sort of normal, whatever that was in the first place. And obviously, I'm hearing that normal wasn't super supportive to begin with either. But, some colleges and universities have built-in systems of support, like tuition reimbursements or childcare facilities, that family housing, spaces for new mothers to have private space, paid family leave. But like, rapid fire, if there was something, something that colleges could put in place moving forward, what would it be? Let's start with Leanne.
Give me guaranteed paid emergency leave that is separate from other leave. If we are expected to provide care, whether it's our children or our parents or anything, we need to have space to do that, because we do have to make a choice, and we cannot do everything. We certainly can't do everything well. Without definitely sacrificing our own health, physical and mental health. I'd like to see that flexible work schedules and telecommuting being here to stay, as well as, as a new parent, my ability to engage in professional development, go to conferences and that sort of thing completely dried up after my daughter was born, because it's incredibly difficult, whether you're breastfeeding or not. And the last year has kind of leveled the playing field a little bit, and made professional development, conferences, engagement with our colleagues much easier. And I'd like to see that continue to be generalized and not just an afterthought, because I think it's good for parents, but it's also wonderful for people with disabilities, et cetera, et cetera. I'd like to see, especially with COVID, that parent and labor representation on decision-making committees, and transparency from those committees as well. I mean, that was one thing that was a huge source of frustration the entire year throughout the pandemic, was just not being involved in the conversations, not being involved in the decisions, and not even knowing, even as a union leader, what was going on, and not being able to tell my colleagues what was going on. Those are the big things.
Yeah, it's been amazing what we couldn't do before the pandemic that made things so inaccessible and flexible that all of a sudden we were able to do so quickly. Am I right? Tristan, what do you think? What are some things?
I mean, I'm coming from this not as a faculty member or anything like that. I'm coming in as a graduate student. And so for me, I would love to see graduate programs kind of normalize the fact that their students have kids, and then normalize the fact that when I ask for funding, I'm not asking for funding just to go to research. I'm asking for funding to pay for childcare. Like, that needs to be part of the package here. And then just having access to a center that, like, on campus, being more of like a drop-in kind of situation, being a drop-in childcare situation. Like, if I have to have my kids home from school that day, not necessarily because they're sick or anything like that, but being able to kind of drop them off and be like, I've got work to do in the library. Here you guys go. I'll be back in a couple of hours. I mean, I feel like that's something that should be standard across the board. I mean, personally, because it's not just graduate students that have kids, but the students themselves might have kids as well. You have non-traditional students. And so seeing that would be, I think, a huge relief to both faculty, students, graduate students. And so for me, that would be a big plus, personally. And I agree with everything Leanne was saying as well, like all of it, to just overhaul the system.
Yeah, athletic clubs and gyms have drop-offs, so why not work, right?
Exactly. That was my thought, like, exactly.
Totally. Polly, what do you think? What else could we add to this list? You're muted. Hey, Polly, we can't hear you.
Okay, I didn't say anything important. No, there's a lot of things that they could add. One of the things I'd love is teamwork. I have a lot of observations that I'd like to be able to share with my colleagues. I'd like to be able to be invited to the table. I've been to conferences and done all the done training. I've done all the things, and I would just like to be allowed to be a member of my own college as an employed person there, as a professor, as someone with 30 years of education from preschool on. And I really would like the college systems to move from the 1300s way up to the 21st century, and just acknowledge that, like when if I am teaching a class as an adjunct, my peers that I know around town, maybe they teach at 4 or 5 different campuses, and or I only teach at one, and then if there's not enough students for my class, I'm dropped. So I usually get fired right at Christmas, and I have no notice. I'll get the last paycheck and then I'm gone. And so my children never get any Christmas presents from me, really. And then so what I would really like is, I would like to be able to just get online and say, hey, I'm available. There's 6 campuses at my college. Is anyone else need an English professor? I also teach 7 other things you could have me teach. Instead, like, I'm just stuck, whereas this other campus might be trying to find someone and they're desperate. There's no communication, and that would be really helpful to be treated like an employee and not like just a random person they found on the street.
Yeah. I don't know how to follow that up, Polly. I really don't. I'm struggling for words. Denise, what else could we add to this list?
I completely agree with what Leanne was saying in the beginning with regards to leave. Caretaker sick leave that's unrelated to your personal parental leave sounds great to me, because I've had to take some leave because of my son, and I was like, well, what if this leave runs out? Do I have any left for myself? What Tristan said was really interesting to me, especially considering during the pandemic, there was on-site childcare drop-offs offered at my institution, but only offered for faculty. And I thought that was very interesting. So just building off of what Tristan had said, on-site drop-off care for all, and professional development stipends for students, managers, higher pay for student workers is something that I'm thinking about as well, who demonstrate need. Flexibility with regards to children at public programs or childcare stipends for babysitters, offered to parents who need to work at night. And this is a little bit sci-fi, but I want to say 8 hours of nap time for caregivers.
Yeah.
Each month.
Nice. Shannon, we've got a long list of a big dream. What else you got?
Oh, I love that. Thank you, Denise. That's fantastic. I'm dreaming of that. It seems as if it needs to be. I mean, we need, obviously, as parents, both as graduate students, as as adjuncts, as term employees, as staff, as faculty. I mean, there needs to be at least a bare minimum of material support, and that may take its shape in kind of money. It could be kind of child drop off or care, and it's shocking to see the inequities across, where you'll find some universities where it's like they are all on board with this, and then other universities and colleges like they don't care at all, right? And at least to me, it seems like it would be in the university's benefit to say, listen, we'd like you to come here, and this is, a package, that we can offer you, and this will help, take care of your childcare needs, emergency leave, decent health care, and so forth. I mean, I've been thinking this conversation in the way of like, who can I talk to up in admin to advocate for these changes, right? Like, who can I talk to that actually was a TA or an adjunct that had kids and had these struggles? Because I mean, the CEOs and all those folks, the money counters, they have a
Yeah. We've got a big vision, y'all. A big vision. That's what this movement is all about. So, what's it going to take? How do we get parents what they need? Kristen, what's it going to take?
Organizing. I mean, honestly, I think it gets down to it. I mean, you just got to get together, and I think banding across the university, not just departmentally, like with their local department cliques or whatever, so that these are needs that aren't limited by department. These are needs that everybody can benefit from. And so making sure that that recognition is there, and then just flat out, hey, let's fight for it. Let's ask for it. Let's do this.
Let's do this. Shannon, how are we going to get it?
Organizing, but organizing, as Tristan was saying, I mean, not just in the arts and sciences, right? But actually reaching out to different schools and different programs, different workers, reaching out to undergrads and non-trad students who have returned to school after having children, those that are caregivers for perhaps grandchildren or relatives that have moved into them, and this kind of broader understanding of demands that students and workers have. And I mean, the only way essentially is to kind of organize and amplify these voices and these concerns, and work toward kind of a utopian vision like Denise was suggesting.
Yes. Let's get our utopia. Denise, what do we got to do?
I'm going to say organize to transparency with regards to asking the right questions, give up this respectability politics culture. We all know that these institutions aren't perfect. We are in an information age, so everybody is like aware to some extent. So let's be honest about what the issues are, talk with each other, and organize.
And if you're not paying attention, you're living under a rock, that's for sure. Leanne, what do we got to do?
I've been going to protests and I've been active for 20 years or so, and nothing in my life has politicized me quite like becoming a parent. And I know I'm not the only one. I know we're exhausted. We're stretched to the limit, but we have to take advantage of that. We have to, if we've sort of suffered through the beginnings of balancing work and childcare, be advocates for colleagues, be proactive about support. That we need to frame the difficulty of parenting not as a rite of passage that we all have to go through, but as an opportunity to come together and imagine something better just for ourselves, for our children, and for each other. Because we're all feeling it, and it needs to happen.
Give ourselves the space to dream and make it work. Polly, what do we got to do? How do we make this happen?
I'd say it's by working together. I almost gave up being a professor, even though I've wanted to do that my entire life. And one of the things that kept me going was Dr. Jill Biden. When I found out she was a college professor, where my brother went to college, where my friends went to the community college in Northern Virginia, I was like, okay, if she can go around and grade papers, I can do. I'll grade papers during karate. I'll grade papers sitting in the car. I'll grade papers at night. I'll grade papers all night. I can do this. And so I think that it takes, I'm really excited that people like her have continued to push for good higher education. And I think if we work together, we can change this. I'm 43 years old. I've spent $70,000 on my education. I've never repaid a penny. I now owe $25,000 in interest, and I teach college every day. My children are about to go to college, and I would just like a chance to be above the poverty line. I would like a chance for things to be fair, and I would like to be treated like I'm an equal person to everyone who loves to teach.
Yes. Yes. On that note, you heard it here, folks. Let's get organized both on our campuses and nationwide. If you don't know how, reach out to AFT Academics. We've got folks like this working on it all over the place in lots of creative ways and lots of creative work happening. Thank you to our panelists for being open and vulnerable and truth tellers. Like Denise said, we've got to do more of that. And you all are so brave for putting yourselves out there. Also, thank you to everyone for tuning in. Catch our next event. It's going to be an online training called Union 101. So if you don't know much about unions, or if you want to know more about AFT Academics, join us. And then please feel free to tweet, share, comment, ask us questions. We'd love to hear from you. We'd love to hear your story. We'd love to put into a program something else you'd like to hear. So just let us know. And that's all. So long for now. Thank you all again for being here.